Hi everybody, and welcome to the final of 14 nights of storytelling. The original plan was to broadcast live this evening, but I did receive quite a few emails from people who have developed a routine of listening at different times in the evening. So I've decided that I will record this and then in a future time advertise some live broadcasts of stories. So thank you for joining us. My name is Julie Hartley and I am one of the directors of Centauri Arts, which is Centauri Summer Arts Camp, the Academy in Toronto, international retreats for writers, and a new online writing school. So thank you for joining us for the final night, and tonight's story is going to be called The Maids in the Mirror. It's a Chinese folk story, and the first time I told this at camp, one of the campers said to me, Disney should do this. And I have to say it's got that feel of being an epic adventure. So I hope you enjoy it. Make yourselves comfortable, grab your favorite pillow, a cup of tea, whatever you need, and then join us for The Maids in the Mirror. Once upon a time, there lived a mother and her two sons. And they lived in an area of China where there were not very many people. It was wild, it was beautiful, it was mountainous. And as the boys grew to be young men, the mother began to worry. How would they ever find somebody and fall in love when they lived in such a remote place? And the boys turned to their mother and they said, "Don't worry about us because we have no intention of marrying unless we find our soulmate." And the mother thought this was ridiculous. She'd grown up in a world where soulmates were just not something you even thought about. You thought about getting married, starting your own farm somewhere, having a family of your own, and building a life for yourself. What was all this business of soulmates? How ridiculous was that? My sons, she worried, they have their heads in the clouds, and how are they possibly going to make their way in life if all they think about is soulmates? One night, the old woman became so worried about her sons that she went out into the back garden and she lifted her head to the moon and she asked the gods for help. She said, "My sons need a dose of realism. For all they think about is falling in love with their soulmates one day. How can they do that in this isolated part of China? And why is it even realistic?" All of a sudden, there was a flash of white light, and a ball of light flew from the sky and landed at the ground at her feet. And the ball of white light became a man with a long white beard. And he turned to the old woman, and he said, "What your sons say is not foolish. What your sons say is a wild and wonderful dream to fall in love with one's soulmate. And the fact is this, each of the two of them does have a soulmate. But without our help, they will never meet them, for their soulmates are far away and unable to reach them. They are not free, and they need the help of the two boys to gain their freedom." Well, at this, the woman was not only astounded, but also a little scared. But the last thing she wanted was her sons embarking on a dangerous and epic adventure. But the old man handed her two mirrors. "Give each of these mirrors to your sons," she said, "and in the morning they should look in them, and in the mirror they will see the face of their heart's delight, the face of their soulmate. And should they wish to find their soulmate, then they should bring this mirror out under a full moon, shine it up at the moon, and a pathway will be illuminated for them, a golden red thread that will lead them through the mountains to the place where they can find, meet, and rescue their heart's delight." Then the old man disappeared, leaving the woman with the two mirrors. And she hurried indoors and she woke her sons and she handed them the mirror. And the first son looked in his mirror, and he saw in the mirror a woman dressed in a pink dress, a pink robe all the way to the ground. And as he looked at this woman, to him she was the most beautiful person he'd ever seen. And he looked at her eyes and realized that he was seeing himself reflected in them, and that the two of them were meant to spend their lives together. "I will marry no one but her," he said. "She is my soulmate." And then the old woman handed a mirror to her second son. And he looked in the mirror, and he saw a woman dressed in a full-length emerald green gown. And he looked at her face, and to him she was the most beautiful face he'd ever seen. "This is my soulmate," he declared, "and I will marry none but her." Sadly, the woman told the two boys what the old man had told her, that the women were unable to reach the two of them, for they were far away and being imprisoned, and that the two boys had to reach them and set them free in order to spend their lives together. "This we will do," declared the first son. And the woman told them that they had to take their mirrors out at the next full moon and shine the mirrors up at the moon, and that a pathway will be illuminated through the mountains. "Please do not do this," she begged. "Please go to the local town instead. Get to know some people your own age. Maybe you'll fall for somebody else. Maybe you won't have to embark on this wild quest." But the two boys were adamant that no one else would be good enough, that they had to meet and spend their lives with their heart's delight, with their soulmates. And so the woman started begging that they not both go at once. "Please," she said, "for if you both go at once, you are both lost to me, and then who will help me if you never return? I am old, and I cannot take care of the land by myself." And she brought this up again and again, until at last the boys relented, and they agreed that at the next full moon, the elder son should go to seek his soulmate, while the younger would remain behind, and then when the elder son returned, the younger would have his turn. So at the next full moon, the three of them went out into the garden. The elder son stepped forward with his mirror and shone it upwards, so that the moon shone at the face of the beloved woman he had been looking at every day since he gained his mirror. And the moon shone at the glass, and suddenly a pathway was illuminated, a gold and red thread that spun through the mountains. And the elder son, without even turning to say goodbye to his mother and to his brother, followed the thread, running first and then walking up into the mountains. And he walked for 3 days, following the red thread, until he came to a cave, and that was where the red thread ended. And at the mouth of the cave sat an old man with a long white beard. And the boy recognized the old man from his mother's description. And the old man beckoned him forward. And he said, "You have a long and difficult quest ahead of you, for your soulmate is being held in a garden, high up in the mountains. And this garden is owned by a witch. And the witch captures people from all over the world, and she turns them into flowers, and they must spend the rest of their days as flowers in her garden behind her high walls. That is where your soulmate is." "Well, how do I rescue her? How do I turn her back to herself?" asked the elder son. "Well," said the old man, "all you have to do is shine the mirror at the flower, and she will resume her human shape. That is not the difficult part. The tough part is going to be getting there. For the garden is high up in the mountains, and you will face 2 terrible and difficult challenges before you can get there." "Well," said the elder son, "tell me what they are. I am not afraid." "As long as your courage does not desert you," said the old man, "you will manage each of these 2 challenges, but the minute your courage deserts you, you will die." "I have enough courage," said the first son, and the old man handed him 2 objects. The first was a whip, but it was small and meager. It was the type of whip that a little child might use as a toy. And then he handed him also a ball of yarn. "These appear to be nothing," said the old man, And yet if you believe in them and use them at your time of need, they will save you." Well, at this, the first son thanked the old man, bowed deeply in respect, and continued up the mountains. For 3 days he walked into the mountains, until he came to a narrow pass. So narrow, in fact, that 3 people stood side by side, arms outstretched, would be able to touch the walls. And he could hear something rumbling behind the pass, and he realized that whatever was there would have to be faced, for he had to go through this pass to continue upon his way. And the rumbling got louder, and the ground began to shudder, and through the pass came an enormous and fearsome dragon, and the dragon belched, and flames emitted from its mouth. And the first son reached for the tiny child's whip that the old man had given him, and he thrashed out with the whip, and instantly the whip grew in his hand to become 10 feet long, and it snaked through the pass, a golden flame at its tip, and it reached the dragon and coiled around the dragon's neck, and the dragon that had been fearsome and enraged became terrified and shrunk in size and became pitiful. And the first son did not allow his courage to desert him, and the dragon became afraid of him and clambered up onto the rocks and ran away and disappeared. And the boy curled back his whip, and it shrunk to the size of a child's toy once again. And he felt proud of himself, for he had done what the old man demanded of him. He'd maintained his courage and believed in the first magical object. And so he continued through the pass and up the mountain. And he climbed for another 3 days, until he reached a chasm. And the chasm was deep and dark, and the path continued on the other side, but there was no bridge. And he looked to the path on the other side and saw that it wound up to high walls. And behind the high walls he knew was the witch's garden. And there was his soulmate. There was his heart's delight. But how to cross the chasm? The boy looked down, and he saw that in the deepest, darkest depths of the chasm, writhing and roiling, were all the hideous things imaginable. Slimy and evil creatures, skeletal arms that reached upwards as if to grab at him. Everything fearsome and terrible. "I cannot allow myself to fall down there," said the first son. And he took out the ball of yarn. He held one end, and he tossed the ball of yarn across the chasm. And when it reached the other side, the yarn became a rope bridge. "Okay, so now I can cross," said the boy. "All I have to do is maintain my belief in this magical object, and all I have to do is maintain my courage, and I will get to the other side." And he put one foot on the rope bridge and another, and he started to cross. And he crossed right to the middle of the rope bridge. And when he got to the middle, he made his fatal mistake. He looked down. And when he looked down, everything that he saw down there filled him with such a terrible fear that his courage deserted him. And as his courage deserted him, the rope bridge again became a ball of twine, and the boy plunged down, down, down into the slimy depths of the water below and sank from sight. Meanwhile, back in the valley, the old woman and her second son waited for the elder brother to return. And days stretched to weeks, and he did not come. And every full moon, the second son would go out to the garden, and he would wish that he could leave and he could find his heart's delight. But he had promised his mother that he would not do so. And so he would go inside and sadly wait for his brother's return. And then weeks stretched into months until it became clear that the first son was not coming back. And then the mother grew fearful for both of her sons, until at last the second son turned to her, and he said, "Mother, if you allow me to leave, I promise I will go and search for not only my soulmate, but my elder brother too. Perhaps it could be that I will return with them both." But the mother was fearful. "Perhaps you'll never return," she said, "and if you never return, I will have lost both of you." But the second son was determined, and she so admired his courage that she realized she had to hazard his life in order to stand a chance of getting back the lives of both her sons. And so the next full moon, she went out to the garden with her second son. And he shone his mirror up at the moon. And as well as his true love illuminated in the mirror, he saw a red gold thread. And the thread snaked out from his mirror and showed his way up through the mountains, the exact same route that his elder brother had taken. And he turned and embraced his mother. And then he walked forward on his quest and up into the mountains with a jaunty step. And he followed the red gold thread for 3 days, feeling hopeful, for he knew he had great courage, and he wanted more than nothing else in life to find his heart's delight and to find his brother. And after 3 days of walking, the red gold thread ended at the mouth of a cave. And sitting in the mouth of the cave was the old man with the long beard that his mother had described. And he walked forward and bowed low in respect to the old man. And the old man said, "You have come a long way, but you have much further to go, and you must show great courage if you are to succeed where your elder brother has failed." And the second brother nodded and said, "I will find my true love, and I will also find my elder brother, and I will bring both of them back." And the old man said, "Well, your true love lies in a garden at the very top of the mountains. It is a garden inhabited by a witch who captures people and turns them into flowers. So your emerald gold gown, your true love with her emerald gold gown, is now an emerald green flower, and she lies in the witch's garden. You must gain access to the witch's garden, and there you must shine the mirror on your true love, and she will take her human form once again. But getting there will be the difficult thing." And he handed him 2 magical objects. One was a whip no longer than a child's toy, and the other was a ball of yarn. "Take these 2 objects and believe in their magical powers," said the old man. "When you need them, use them, and if you believe in them, they will help you. But your courage must not desert you. Keep these 2 things in mind and you will surely succeed." The second son bowed to the old man and continued up the mountain. For 3 days he walked until he came to a mountain pass. And the pass was so narrow that 3 people standing side by side with their arms outstretched would be able to touch both the walls. And the second son realized that he had to cross through this mountain pass in order to continue off up the mountain. But he could hear something terrible through the pass, a pounding and a rumbling and a shuffling. And before long, through the pass came a huge and terrible dragon. And the second son held fast to his courage, and he reached out for the small whip that had been given to him by the old man. And he took the whip and he lashed out at the dragon with the whip, and the whip became huge with a silver gold flame at its tip. And the whip coiled around the dragon's neck, and the dragon that was huge and terrible became terrified. And he looked at the boy who stood there so strong and courageous, and he fought his way out of the whip and ran for his life. And the boy coiled the whip again, and it became a child's toy as it was before. And still filled with courage, he continued on through the mountain pass and up the mountain. For 3 more days he walked, until he came to the edges of a chasm. And when he looked down, he saw everything roiling and evil and terrible in the base of the chasm, skeletal arms and slimy green monsters writhing in its depths. And the boy took the ball of yarn, and he tossed it to the other side, and it took on the shape of a rope bridge. And he stepped forward, knowing that his courage should not desert him, knowing that he had to maintain belief in this magical object at all costs. And he took 1 step, 2 step, 3 steps, and he continued walking until he was right in the middle of the chasm. And then he made the mistake of looking down, and down in the depths of the chasm he saw the face of his own elder brother in the waters, looking up at him and pleading and filled with terror for the terrible things that writhed and wriggled around him. And the second son felt the fear creeping up in him, and he forced himself to push it back down. And he did not think, I am standing only on a ball of twine. He continued to believe in the strength of the rope bridge, and he allowed his own courage to shape around him and to prevent him from thinking about the fate of his brother. And so it was that he continued safely across the rope bridge to the other side. And he gathered his ball of twine, and forcing himself to turn his back on the chasm where he knew his brother lay, he walked up the last stretch of the mountain to the wall that surrounded the witch's garden. Then he took his whip, and he lashed out at the wall until it became a rope for him to climb, and he clambered up and over the wall and jumped down onto the other side. And this was a sight to behold. Beautiful flowers of every hue stretching in all directions. And the second son's heart grew immense with pity, for he knew that every one of those flowers was a human being enchanted by the evil witch. And he walked through the garden, taking immense care not to step on a single leaf, not to disturb a single petal, until he reached the center of the garden and looked down, and there were 2 flowers side by side, one of them with beautiful pink petals and the other one emerald green. And when he looked at the emerald green flower, he knew he was seeing his heart's delight, his soulmate, and he was filled with love for her. And he crouched down and he shone his mirror on her petals, and immediately the flower was transformed to a girl in a floor-length emerald green gown. And she looked at him, and he looked at her, and she said, this enchantment could only have been broken by my soulmate, by my heart's desire. And I look at you, and I see indeed that you are the person I will love most in this world. And she reached forward and embraced him. Then they turned together to look at the flower with the pink petals. I can do nothing for your sister, said the second son, for my brother has perished in the chasm outside these walls. And the girl in the emerald green dress was preparing to mourn her sister when suddenly the 2 of them heard a great scream of rage coming from the other side of the garden, and they turned to see the wicked witch standing there looking at them both. And the witch ran forward, filled with rage. How dare you trespass in my garden? She screamed at the second son. How dare you meddle with my flowers? These flowers are not yours, said the second son. These are people you've enchanted. You had no right to enslave them in your garden, no right to take these people prisoner. At that the witch was silent. You must be her soulmate, she said to the second son. And they could see, the 2 of them, as they stood strong side by side, that the witch was immediately afraid that she may lose them. There is another part of this enchantment that you do not know, said the witch. At the very top of this mountain, I keep wild horses. I will set you a challenge, and it is only when you succeed that you can leave this garden. Succeed at my challenge, and I will be unable to stop you. Tell us your challenge, then, said the girl in the emerald green gown, for she was as brave as her heart's delight. And the 2 of them stood with their hands entwined, waiting to see what the witch would make them do. You must go together to the top of this mountain, where my wild horses are kept, said the witch. All night long you must struggle to tether the horses, and only when you have done so, when dawn comes, only then will you be allowed to roam free." And then she disappeared, and the two of them clambered up to the top of the mountain. They saw that the sun was about to set, and that there were 12 wild horses tethered. There were 12 wild horses standing on the top of the mountain. "All we have to do is tether them," said the girl in the emerald green dress, "and yet I know that there is some magic amiss here." And sure enough, as the sun sank in the west, the horses were transformed. And what were 12 wild stallions were now 12 hideous scorpions, the size of the horses. And the two of them stood steadfast, side by side, as the stallions, now turned to scorpions, moved towards them as one. And the 12 scorpions were fierce and poisonous, and the size of the horses they had replaced. "Back to back," said the girl in the emerald green dress, and she seized from her heart's desire the whip that he held in his hand, and the two of them stood back to back, and fiercely they lashed out with the ball of twine that had again become a long robe, and with the whip that was now the size that it had been when it fought the dragon. And all night long they whipped and lashed out at the scorpions, and one by one they gathered the scorpions on a rope, and they tethered the scorpions and pulled them towards them. And they fought side by side, back to back, courageously, all night long, battling the scorpions and at the same time tying them with the rope. And their courage never deserted them. They fought for themselves, they fought for one another, and they fought for the brother and the sister they had lost, and never had the world seen such courage before. And then dawn came, and as the sun rose in the east, the scorpions were transformed again to the wild horses they had been, and now they were tethered with ropes. And the witch was enraged that the two of them had managed to use their magical objects and their courage and their love for each other to defeat the horses and to end her enchantment. "Now you have to let us go," said the girl in the emerald green dress. "I have to let you two go, it is correct," said the witch. "However, I do not have to let your sister go. The pink flower is mine forever." She looked at the two of them, and then she said, "I am old, and I wish to capture more people for my garden. I will let you go, but I require of you one last thing." "What is that?" said the girl in the emerald green dress. "Take me with you," said the witch. "Carry me on your back down to the world of men, and you're free to go on your way." And at this, the girl in the emerald green dress had an idea, for she was as wise as she was courageous. And she said, "You are too heavy for us to carry you down the mountain. You must transform yourself to something small. I know you can do that, and then it's easier for us to carry you. If you do that, we will agree." And she looked down, and she saw a pot in the garden, the type of thing that gardeners sometimes use. And she picked up the pot, and she said to the witch, "Transform yourself to a toad, and fly and jump into this pot, and we will take you down the mountain quite easily, and then you can be transformed back to your human self." And the witch saw the wisdom of this, so she transformed herself to a toad and hopped into the pot, and immediately the girl in the emerald green dress grabbed the lid that was hiding in the grass, and she slammed it down on the top of the pot. And they both had the witch in their power. And they journeyed out of the garden, and they continued walking until they came to the banks of the chasm. And already the girl in the emerald green dress was deep in sorrow for the sister she'd left behind. "Perhaps I'll find some way of freeing her from the enchantment without her true love and without his magic mirror," she thought to herself. And the second son was deep in sorrow for his elder brother. Perhaps I will find some way of getting him out of the chasm, he told himself. But when they reached the high, steep sides of the chasm and looked down into it, all hope deserted him. And he knelt down on the sides of the chasm and looked down to where he could see his brother, helpless in its depths, staring up at him. And the second son began to weep. And he cried for his mother on her own back in the valley, and he cried for all the people in the witch's garden, and he cried for the maiden in her pink dress that neither he nor his heart's desire would ever be able to rescue. But most of all, he cried for the brother he loved, the brother whose face stared back up at him sorrowfully from the depth of the magical chasm. And as he cried, giant tears slipped from his cheeks and fell down into the water. And the water had never seen something as filled with love as those tears. They had never admitted something as filled with love as those tears were. And as the tears fell onto the water, it had a strange effect upon it. And the water could not repel the goodness of the tears, could not repel the desire in those tears. And the tears fell upon the first son, and he was immediately transported out of the water and up into the air on the power of love borne by those tears, until he was standing beside his brother on the banks of the chasm. And the two brothers embraced. They were so happy to see each other. And the first brother still clasped in his hand the magical mirror. And the second son said to him, "Now we go together to rescue your heart's desire." And the lady in the emerald green gown led the way, and they went up and over the witch's wall to the other side, and they went to the pink flower, where immediately the first son recognized his heart's desire, and he shone his mirror upon her, and the pink flower was transformed immediately into a woman wearing a long pink gown. And she said that enchantment could only have been broken by my heart's desire. And I look at you and I see that you are definitely he. And the two of them embraced. "Now we can be gone from here," said the woman in the pink dress. And the four of them clambered over the witch's wall for one last time. And they went towards the chasm. And as they did so, the girl in the emerald green dress seized from her pocket the jar containing the witch. "I will not be true to my word, for you have tricked thousands of us and imprisoned us in your garden," she said. "You will stay where you belong for all eternity." And she took the jar and she slung it into the slimy depths of the chasm far, far below. And the waters opened to admit one of their own, and the witch sank further and further into its depths, to a depth that she would never rise from again. And as soon as it became clear to the garden, the enchanted garden, that the witch could never return, the enchantment was broken. And the walls fell, and all the flowers turned to their human form again. And the two girls in their emerald dress and their pink dress and their two heart's delights turned to the garden and saw it milling with people running in all directions, testing out their human forms. Some of them had been flowers for just 2-3 years, and some of them had been flowers for hundreds or thousands of years. And they embraced one another, gathered together in their friend groups, and prepared to come down the mountain again to the villages that mourned them. And that mountain was filled with laughter that day. And the two brothers grabbed the hands of the girls they loved, and they crossed the chasm and went through the gap where the dragon lived, and ran past the cave where the old man waited to greet them, and they paused only to bow low in thanks to him, and ran further down the mountain to where the boy's mother was waiting, as she had waited with bated breath for the many days before. And before long, the two great marriages took place, and the two brothers married their soulmates, as they had always wanted to do. And the old woman, their mother, was forced to admit that maybe she'd been wrong, and being practical was not always the best thing, and that maybe there was someone special out there for each of us. And maybe she might find her heart's delight, her soulmate one day too. But in the meantime, the 5 of them lived together in the small cottage in this vast and beautiful corner of China for many years to come. In fact, it can be said that the 5 of them lived happily ever after. That was our 14th and final story. Thank you for joining us for these. All the stories are there on YouTube for you to listen to anytime you want. And I'm hoping that I'll be back in the next week or two with some live broadcasts and with more stories. Thank you and have a great night.